100 years ago, mankind came together and with combined strength created an aerial technological city fueled by enormous magical power. It was the Icarus Project, and the city was named the Cradle of the Sky. Like many other creations made by humans before then, they celebrated this one. Why wouldn't they? It was hands down their boldest and most successful invention. This invention also gave the world a magical island. They called Paradise, or the Garden of Eden. On the flip side was the underground city, Proserpina, the giant hole created when they lifted the paradise into the sky. It was seen as some dark world, and its establishment marked the world's division into 3 parts: Proserpina, the paradise, and land. You know, the place everyone was before they got innovative. It is in Proserpina that Niobe meets Haluk for the first time and the wheels are set in motion. On any other day, this meeting wouldn't have been possible, but unlike other days, she isn't with her parents and is hiding out. It might be because of the gem in her hand, because whenever she went out, it was with her mom and she always clung to her desperately. She didn't care what the villagers said about this attitude, though. She had long accepted she was the odd one, an introverted child who didn't like anything in particular. Whenever she found something she liked, she treasured it, keeping it to herself and no one else. Thing is, Haluk heard this and more. Like how she isn't good at communicating with people and no one knows what she's thinking about most of the time. He'd like to know if she wants him to treat her according to everyone else's perception of her. She doesn't respond, so he switches things up, wanting to know why she is in a mine that has been closed for years. He probably expects some crazy story, but instead she tells him she didn't come here intentionally, she actually got lost. Every time she followed her parents to work, she discovered beautiful gems. With time, her interest in them grew, and she began to leave her parents to go deep into the railway to find gems no one will ever discover. She planned to collect all the gems in the mine, but earlier in the day, while she was on her usual hunt, she got chased by bats and ended up in this cart. Haluk is amused by her story and doesn't even try to hold back his annoying laugh. He is certain the bats were scared of her, so her being scared of them is what makes this so funny. Tired of getting teased, Niobe asks him to take her home. She didn't know he had thought ahead. As he hops into the cart, dislodges the brakes and lets it fly. She is terrified, not just because they are moving at unimaginable speed, but also because they are heading towards a dead end. Haluk said this was the fastest way home when the ride started. Now he's advising her to hold on to something to prevent her from falling off. Having no other choice, she heeds his warning and they dash through the railway, eventually coming to a stop when they get to town. There, Haluk's coworker is waiting for him, so he has to go. But Niobe isn't satisfied. She had given up hope in being found, but he came to her rescue. She wants to know how he was able to find her. His reply is sharp and simple, a claim that he's just like her, seeking something no one else has ever seen. He tells her that he'll see her later, and she holds him to that. She didn't know that she'd regret it in the coming years. Now, sitting in the tub, that day is all she can think about. And when Haluk walks in wanting to know why she seems so lost, she tells him she was just thinking about her childhood. He asks her to forget that time and focus on the long night they have ahead of them. If it was then she would have had a problem with letting go of the past, now she is willing to try. Because the man she is with now is an insult to the one he used to be. This man might be a stranger now, but 10 years ago he wasn't. Just days after her first encounter with him, she lay in her bed staring at the gem she found, wondering how Haluk was doing. She hoped he was okay and was about falling asleep with him in her head when she heard her parents getting ready to head out. They had a meeting with the village head and planned to go see him at his house before returning. Niobe decided to tag along. Even though she felt drowsy and her parents couldn't stop her, they could only move at her pace. A few minutes after leaving their house, they all arrived at the village head's house, only to be welcomed in by his son, Haluk. It was a pleasant surprise for Niobe, who had no idea he was such a big deal until that day. Position aside, she missed him and couldn't contain how excited she was to see him. Her parents, though shocked that they knew each other, didn't get much of an explanation from them. Altogether, they were glad that he was a familiar face and asked if he could look after their daughter. While they went in to talk with his father, she hadn't rested and they hoped she could sleep a little. Willingly, Haluk accepted, offering Niobe a chance to relax and read books with him. And she took it, leaving her parents to go with someone else, for the first time in her life. Side by side, they marched to his room, but instead of talk with her or read with her, Haluk kept all the reading to himself while she sat on the bed anxiously. The room was dead silent, save the sound of the ticking clock that wasn't even helping matters. Truth is, he had given her a book to read, but it wasn't easy to crack. Then there was the bed that wasn't hers, and the realization that she wasn't in her world no more. She didn't feel uncomfortable initially, but after recognizing the new position she was in, she eventually ended up moodily crouching by the wall. Not too long after her mood changed, Haluk noticed her and tried to help her ease up by asking her to tell him about herself, or anything that has caused her trouble lately. Faced with either talking about her troubles or things she likes, Niobe decided that she had to say something. She racked her brain, but all she could remember was how a friend of hers asked her what she liked, and she ended up having no answer to that question, no matter how much she thought about it. Since she didn't have an answer at the spot as well, she threw the question back to him. She specifically wanted to know which animal he preferred between cats and dogs. He replied that he liked cats, but would rather keep a dog as a pet. She thought he was cheating by picking the two, but he made her understand that it doesn't always have to be one answer. Since he had shown her a new way to look at things, he again asked her what she liked. This time she was determined to say something and parted her lips to speak, only to get interrupted by her mother. She was at the door and wanted to take Myobi home. Unintentionally, she disrupted their conversation, but Haluk bore no grudge. In her presence, he praised Myobi's intelligence, while she thanked him for looking after her daughter. She then picked her up, ready to leave, but she was stopped by the girl shaking vigorously as she demanded to be put down. Her mother obeyed, and once her foot touched the ground, she ran to Haluk to tell him that she liked the color blue and yellow, just like his eyes, and then ran away. It was a bold thing to say, he acknowledges that, but decides to dismiss it as a childish compliment. Simultaneously, in another part of the house, Surgood, the village head and Haluk's adoptive father, was fiddling with an arrow during a serious meeting with his deputy, who informed him of more villagers agreeing that they embark on another holy night. He made sure to ask his deputy if he had explained to everyone how serious it was. It wasn't some ordinary night or some ordinary fight that was about to happen. It was a day he hated so much that he found it dreadful to call its name. Like every other battle, the Holy Night has an origin. We know the world was divided into 3 parts: the world in the sky, land, and the underground world. In the underground world, Proserpina, the inhabitants began to lose limbs because of its harsh environment. Upon that, they had to deal with endless work and inequality in the resources allocated to them. Zoning principles were rigid, and with poor rationing, it was unable for Proserpina to operate independently. They looked to the Skylanders and Mainlanders for help, but no one paid attention to their cries. In the end, they all got fed up and took pickaxes to fight physically against the inequality. They lost a lot of lives in that battle, but wrote their names in the sands of time, leaving behind a mark that generations to come would live to remember. That's why Surgood wanted the Holy Night to be successful, to honor the sacrifices of the predecessors and secure the future of the next generation. Speaking of next generation, as preparations were ongoing, Myobi lay in her bed, staring at the dazzling moonlight on the other side of her window. Moonlight like that was rare in Proserpina, and she was enjoying it until she got distracted by a glow coming from her backpack. Eager to find out what was causing it, she rushed to the bag, took it, and poured out its contents. It turned out to be the gem she picked from the mines. Its glow reminded her of Haluk. In fact, to her, the gem looked like him. That was all it took for her to be determined enough to leave the house at such late a time. Even Myobi was confused by her actions. She was too young to understand what she was feeling, but since the moonlight suddenly made her want to see him, she diligently searched for his house, the largest one in the village. Amidst her search, she stumbled upon a moonlight lake. Its glow captivated her, and because she paused to admire it, she was able to see Haluk. He was conveniently in the area. She was glad to see him, and he was more concerned about the beautiful night than he was about her reason for being out so late. According to him, the cause of this spectacle was the Skylanders. Their sky island occasionally needed to recharge power, and by doing that, Proserpina's sky glowed. It was going to be like that for a while, but that wasn't what concerned her. He was her focus, and him popping up from out of nowhere encouraged her to guess he might have appeared because she wanted to see him. Confidently, she tried to call him and hand over the gem, but the little girl in her kept her silent, her heart beating out her chest while she stood there staring at him. Fortunately for her, he somehow heard her first attempt and asked if she called to him. Her courage, suddenly renewed, pushed her to ignore the weird mood she was feeling and give him the gem, telling him that it looked like him. Once the words slipped out, she withdrew, thinking she's just made a mistake. Maybe she did, considering how things end up for her. But on that night, Haluk didn't let it feel like a mistake. He took the gem, praised her for being brave, and promised to look after it since she said it looked like him. It was probably the best night of Myobi's life. As of them, she didn't think it could have gotten better. But it did, in the form of Haluk saying the Sky Island paradise could be reached. He hoped to get there, a place where nights like this one were commonplace. Myobi, completely ignorant, loved his idea, and decided she wanted to go too. He didn't refuse, instead he encouraged the idea, and brought up the idea of them going together when the time came. She agreed, but back then she didn't know the kind of thoughts that arose in Haluk's mind. In her head arose thoughts of making their promise a reality, so she began borrowing large amounts of books from the library to study. The books contained information of the world as it was, and details that could help get to Skyland, aka Paradise. It was hard to study, but the thought of Haluk's smile kept her going, allowing her to discover that passage fees were needed to cross lands. It was most expensive to get to Paradise, meaning she either had to get rich enough to finance their passage, or she had to find a dirty trick to get them there. She kept gathering information. Meanwhile, the village head, Surgood, was at the base of Proserpina with his deputy, getting ready for the coming Holy Night. They were at the underground base, the combat station Surgood had selected for their attack. It was a place that allowed transport of goods and people between Paradise and Proserpina. The only issue was that aside goods, the only people allowed passage were perfect people or those who possessed unexplainable power. Anyone else would be caught as soon as they arrived, due to the tight security of Paradise. The trick behind passage wasn't one they had discovered yet because it was a matter of soul forms and soul frequencies. They were used as identification cards and were like fingerprints, so everyone had a unique soul form. He knew that the only way to pass safely was by finding a way to stop their soul forms from standing out. The day they achieved that was the day he thought they'd win the war. Little did he know that Myobi was already focused on trying to crack the code. She had been reading a lot and taking notes, but one day while taking notes, she accidentally cut herself, and a few drops of blood fell on her book. She tried to clean it off, but accidentally blurred her lines in the process, instantly causing her to panic. She felt bad, true, but that mistake gave her the vivid idea of trying to cover her soul frequency with another one to help her get into Paradise undetected. She became interested in creating a new soul frequency, searching for a way to change hers and Haluk's to resemble that of a person suitable to be in Paradise. What kept her going was her desire to go to a place she had never been to before, with her crush and the smile on his face when they'd get there. Still, she didn't get a breakthrough until she turned 16. A lot of years has passed, but her way in was finally finished. The only thing left was testing it. She would have met Haluk. The man had been like a brother to her for as long as she knew him, but she knew he'd be busy helping Surgood. She didn't want to bother him, and had noticed he smiled less and was willing to change that by showing him there was a way out. With him in mind, she pointed the soul frequency changing gun to her temple and pulled. The result, SSD her collapsing and a surge of energy bursting out from her room to the entire house. Long story short, her device worked, but its success came at a price, one she endured as she made her way to Haluk's house to tell him about her success. There she met him, but she was slowly losing strength and consciousness. If not for him, she would have passed out a while ago. But she had to tell him about the gun. In as few words as possible, she told him that the gun in her hand was their way into Paradise. She has erased her soul, but was losing strength because of it. Still, all she wanted to do was go to the Sky Island with him. She made that very clear before passing out in his arms. Haluk at the time slightly blamed himself for letting things get that bad. For a month, Myobi remained comatose, causing her parents and Surgood to worry. The holy night was the following day, and they planned to go on with it, even though she was comatose. They planned to leave her under Haluk's care. After all, he saw her as his little sister and cared about her. Outside, Haluk eavesdropped. He was surprised that they were embarking on the holy night with Myobi in the condition she was in. They had disregarded soul frequency manipulation and had gotten allies in Paradise to help their revolutionary troops get into Paradise undetected. All that was left when the time came was for Surgood to arrive, and everyone, including Myobi's parents, waited for him. Everyone was so sure they'd attain victory, and when their leader didn't come, they got ready to hop into the supply cart that was coming. At Surgood's home, Haluk assured Myobi they'd see again. He didn't mind her state. He was sure it was bound to happen and left her to go and mess up the revolution by ending Surgood's life. His reason for doing this was because he wanted passage into Paradise. But it wasn't just the old man he backstabbed. No, he ratted the people out to Paradise officials who came and laid waste to everyone. By the time he got to the meetup zone, everyone, except Myobi's mother and the Skylanders, was dead. The grieved woman cursed him for betraying them, but he didn't have a care in the world left to spare. He gave her a bullet, but before dropping, she called to her daughter one last time. It was then Myobi woke, as if answering her mother's call. She would have stayed in bed a bit because of the banging headache she is experiencing, but warm air from the window made her go check the cause. To her displeasure, she saw her whole village was on fire and she immediately began to run. Not to safety, but to search for her father, mother, and Haluk. She felt anxious, but kept calling to them desperately, even if she didn't get a response. She didn't want to believe something had happened to them, but she realized something did when she came across every villager who went out to protest. Seeing them scattered all over the floor, her heart rate doubled, yet her feet glued to the spot, moving only when her mother called to her with her last bit of energy. She was happy to see her daughter alive, but didn't have time to celebrate the grand reunion. All she had time to do, however, was warn her of the coming danger, in form of Haluk. She told her that their holy night failed, so she wanted her to hide, but the girl couldn't obey her mother's last wish. The woman died in her arms. Still, she needed to know if Haluk being involved was true. To do so, she left her there and continued her search for him in the one place she guessed he'd be: the transportation base. Although she had gassed out, she gathered strength to scream his name, calling the attention of him and the Skylander troops. Unaware of who she was, the men saw her as a threat and wanted to shoot her, but he stopped them, giving her the chance to beg him to tell her that he didn't betray them. He didn't, though. Instead, he confirmed her worst fear, accepting his evil deed by saying he wished to finish before she woke up. There was no need to hide under a mask again. Moreover, the portal to Paradise was open, and he was ready to leave. On the other hand, she was ready to forgive, so she begged him not to leave her. To risk his spot at paradise over her was something he couldn't do. What he could do was bid her goodbye and tell her that the next time she saw him, he'd go by a different name. Hoped that day would never come, however. He probably expected her to accept defeat and lay on her back, the 16-year-old who buried her entire village with her own hands. She couldn't let this slide, believing that he sent everyone to hell. So she couldn't let him enjoy a life in heaven. She was determined to make it into paradise and use her hands that she used to dig graves, to dish out the full weight of her revenge. She wasn't bluffing when she proposed this in her heart. She actually began fulfilling her promise by getting into paradise undetected and helping people who suffered harshness from Skylanders. By attacking the system, she made a name for herself and even got a bounty on her head. But that didn't stop her from saving a boy that was about to get scolded by soldiers. To give him hope, she let him know she was their silent hero and required of him that he kept it a secret. The truth is, she didn't just make it into paradise. She walked into its gate with some crazy abilities that helped her fight her battles more efficiently. She still needed allies, though, and went to check on one after her successful save. The man lived in the lower class part of paradise. It's funny that she thought it was some kind of heaven before she got there. It wasn't. There was social inequality, too. The nobles lived big, off the backs of everyone else, and left the rest of the population with a substandard living condition. That's why her ally's daughter was sick, and he had nowhere to take her to help her get better. Their hospitals assigned to them were full, and the only one who healed for free was Myobi, who they knew as the Unknown. Happy to help, she wasted no time in healing the girl, untangling a thread of her soul that was tied. Could it be that she can manipulate souls? She didn't tell, but left as quickly as she came, forcing the villagers to wonder what she really was. She healed villagers for chicken change, and her magic seemed unmatched. So 8 times they debated about her. The end result of all those debates was always that they were grateful to her for showing up for them when no one else came to help them. On her end, every time she overused her abilities, she experienced some harsh side effects. Remember when she used that gun? Yeah, she lost her soul that day. That's how she was able to get into paradise. Luckily for her, by losing it, she gained the ability to manipulate the souls of others. Whenever she went overboard, she would experience internal heat, the feeling of entangled guts and constant disturbance from an entity that looked like Haluk. It came in her dreams, when she was at her weakest, took advantage of her, and left. This time, unlike others, he reminded him that he was no longer going by Haluk, but by Gorkin Bilgener. She kept that information in mind when she woke up, and one of the village nurses came to her for assistance. She didn't want to bother her, initially, but there were too many patients, and a lot of them were supposed to serve as servants for a party being organized by a certain Gorkin Bilgener. That's why she called her. Myobi was shocked to come across this name, as it sounded familiar. Immediately became interested in the party and its host. The nurse, seeing that she knew nothing about the man, told her that he came from the Bluebeard noble family. They stood out from the others with their blue hair and blue eyes that recurred for generations. The more she described this people, the more Myobi racked her brain and was finally able to remember that this was the same name Haluk told her in her dream. That was all she needed to know before asking how she could become a servant at that mansion. How was she going to sneak into the mansion of a family that took over paradise by controlling its military? They had most people fooled by their sophisticated looks, while turning the whole world upside down. On one hand, there was rumors of a revolution. On the other, elites of paradise who were scared of a revolution. To prevent getting caught off guard, they stacked the best weapons. That meant all the money was going to the Bilgeners, coins weren't rotating, and societal collapse was a possibility. The more likely this was, the more profit they made. A dubious family that profited from conflict is what they were. Thinking back on what happened in her village, Myobi was convinced Haluk was with the Bilgeners. Reselling what happened to her people made her feel uncomfortable, but she cast the feeling aside and again asked how she was going to get in. The nurse informed her that entry would be different, since they used soul identification to get in. Only those with the verified soul forms were let in. On getting there, she confirmed what the nurse said, and since her wandering soul hadn't returned, she gave up and turned to leave. She hadn't moved when out of nowhere, someone grabbed her. Instantly, she panicked but calmed down when she realized it was just a maid. The maid stared at her like she recognized her and said she possessed the features of a woman named Karen who was sent to help her. She tried to tell the maid that she got the wrong person, but she refused to listen to reason and dragged her past the verification line. Even when the guard tried to stop them, the maid remained headstrong and argued that the lady she was taking in was a runaway maid. She claimed she was verified once, and that meant she didn't have to be verified a second time. Inside, Myobi was given a maid's uniform, instructed to change into it, and left to do so. During that time, she finally got to breathe a sigh of relief. She was glad that although things didn't go as she planned, she still managed to get in. Phase 1 of her plan was complete, and she hurriedly put on the uniform to get into Phase 2. To the maid's surprise, Myobi's gown was a proper fit, but they didn't have time to dwell on compliments. They had to get things ready for the arrival of the head of the house, Sir Gloken Bilgener. The man was no joke, and fortunately for all his maids and servants, they got ready before he arrived and were able to line up at the door to welcome him. Everyone but Myobi bowed respectfully as he walked in. She couldn't bow because she was busy trying to identify him. She wanted to be sure Haluk and Sir Gloken Bilgener were one and the same, but the maid from earlier didn't let her, putting her head down before she could see his face properly. She was trying to save her, no doubt, but she stepped in too late. Sir Gloken had noticed them. Wasting no time, he walked over to them, and soon realized that Miyobi's face was new to his mansion. Since he last saw her when she was a child, he also didn't recognize her from his past, and requested a recommendation letter from her old master. Head bowed, Miyobi was convinced this man was Haluk, and shuffled her thoughts to find the best response. Two things were clear then. Everyone was waiting to hear what she had to say, and a wrong response would mean her demise. She couldn't let things end the way they were, so she came up with the lie that her previous master was dead, and she came to his mansion looking for work because she heard there was vacancy. She humbly begged him to continue letting her work at his mansion and prayed that he let her continue. Her prayers were answered when he smirked and told her that he was going to turn a blind eye at her and allow her continue working for him. As soon as he walked past them, Miyobi's maid friend sympathized with her. She claimed that he had never been concerned about his workers and would have talked more about his sudden interest, if not for Miyobi's sudden change in mood. She watched her shake vigorously and asked her what was up, but she was too deep in her head to hear her. She had confirmed that Haluk was Sir Gloken, and made up her mind to end his life with her hands. Later in the day, Miyobi had calmed down and was with the other maid when the young lady finally remembered that they didn't do a proper introduction. She went first and introduced herself as Sapona, while Miyobi simply rolled with the name Karen, which was the name of the runaway maid Sapona thought she was. In trust, they agreed to watch each other's backs, after which Sapona offered to help her adapt to the working environment on behalf of the butler who was to handle that. Everyone was busy getting ready for the party, and she guessed Miyobi had worked in a mansion before, but still decided to give her some pointers, which were actually helpful. Diligently, Miyobi played her role as a maid. She had to, so she could keep an eye on Haluk. He was enough motivation for her to work so hard on the first day that even Sapona noticed her devotion and gave her a chocolate to encourage her. Although it reminded her of her nightmares about Haluk, kept her cool, and allowed Sapona to tell her about their sleeping arrangements. She told her that all the maids used the same room and she could sleep next to her if she wanted, which was okay with her. The evening was wonderful, though. Little did they know that it wasn't going to stay that way for long. Few minutes into their discussion, another maid dropped lifeless before them. From the condition she was in, they could tell she fell from a higher part of the mansion, and Sapona panicked. She assumed the maid was dead, but hearing that assumption reminded Miyobi of all the people she lost the day Haluk betrayed them. She refused to let the maid end up like her people and sprang into action. While Sapona stood fixed to the spot, she checked the maid and felt a pulse. That spelt hope. She believed she could save her, but needed Sapona to leave, to allow her use her ability freely. Getting her to do that wasn't hard, however. All she did was ask her to go get help, which she did, giving Miyobi enough time to reach for the thread of her soul and save her. Saving the girl made her happy because it was her first time restoring life, and at the end of the day, it was her resilience that kept the maid breathing. Even Karen noted that and praised her. Unknown to them, Haluk watched everything that happened from his window, expressionlessly. Was he close enough to see her use her ability? We can't say for sure, but it was certain that she had gotten his attention. The following day, Miyobi was busy with her duties when she heard two maids talking about the girl who fell the previous night. They knew her well, and heard she took of their master's eye patch, as in Haluk's eye patch. What she did was crazy, but she was moved by curiosity, and that was probably why she did it. They guessed she must have wanted to know if the curse was real. Hearing this made Miyobi interested in knowing more about their discussion, so she turned to Sapona and asked about the curse they spoke of. Sapona, maintaining her usual smile, dismissed the topic. She said there was nothing special about their master's curse. She advised they continued working, but this made Miyobi feel she was hiding something. She guessed this was something she wasn't supposed to know. She would have pressed regardless, but the head maid disturbed their chat. She had heard a lot about the new Karen, helping her fellow maid last night, and came to see her. To thank her for being her sister's keeper, and to tell her that she'd be handling their master's baths in the meantime. The maid who fell was in charge of that duty, and with her away, Haluk requested for Miyobi. Sapona, clearly against this idea, tried to talk the head maid out of selecting Miyobi. She advised her to pick someone who was actually grounded in the rules of the estate, a suggestion the older lady warned her against, since it spelt defiance of their master's orders. Whether they liked it or not, Miyobi was resuming her new duties by evening. As for getting her up to speed with the rules of the mansion, the head maid left that duty to Sapona. In all, although the new development was a boost for Miyobi's plans, she began to suspect that more happened in the mansion than she knew. The defeated look on Sapona's face made her think that way, but that didn't stop her from going to Haluk's room later that day, to help him bathe. On getting to the bathroom, she confirmed that the man in the tub was Haluk. He had grown greatly, but she was sure it was him. As for his eye patch, it was rather prominent. During Sapona's briefing a little earlier, she told her that the eye patch hid the curse in his right eye. It was said that anyone who met its gaze either lost their mind or died. That being said, the same thing would be avoiding to look him in the eye, right? If only it was that easy. The curse actually drew people to it. Sapona warned her to be careful. No one who looked into that eye ever came back the same. She didn't want Myobi to be the next. Myobi also didn't want to suffer such fate and bathed him cautiously while keenly observing him. Out of anger, and because he seemed to have lowered his guard, at some point Myobi thought about ending his life then and there. As she slowly reached for his neck, he stopped her without even knowing, by asking her to join him in the tub. According to Sapona, the best thing to do when Halleck made a request was to obey without a fuss. Nevertheless, she assured her that he never made any lewd requests. That's not how things seemed, though. Until he arrogantly called her filthy and claimed she was lucky to even stand by him, let alone bathe him. Sure, his harsh words annoyed her, but all she could do was comply. The only problem was that they had history together, and she feared he might recognize her if he stares at her for long. To prevent that from happening, she pulled out the belt of her gown and covered his eyes when he saw reason with her, and gave the go-ahead. Of course, she got his permission before doing this, as her reasons were that she didn't want him feeling embarrassed and that she didn't want to make the same blunder as the last maid. She told herself that she wasn't allowed to feel shame. She had a job to do and needed to use the chance she got to search for his weaknesses. It was easier said than done, though. Myobi came to run him a bath, only to end up getting intimate with him. At climax, he asked her why she came to his estate when she could have run away after the death of her former master. She feared that he would have recognized her, but that question and him looking her in the eye when he asked it was enough to convince her that she was in the clear. He didn't recognize her, and since she did nothing but stare at him bewildered, he left, assuring her that they'd see the next day. Myobi watched him leave, yet she couldn't shake off the unexplained uneasiness she felt. Every day after that, she took care of his bathes, and it wasn't all bad. He didn't wear his eye patch when they were alone and rarely reached out for intimacy. He seemed to have grown fond of her. Well, every step closer was a chance for her to find out his weaknesses, and she managed to find one. In his so-called cursed right eye. It wasn't a curse, but proof that he lacked the complete set of eyes for a Billinger. This discovery alone made her wonder why he hadn't killed her. If he didn't recognize her, he should have done that already. That thought had her laying awake for most of the night. Sapona, as soon as she stepped into the room, noticed that she was deep in thought and decided to pry. Myobi, although she initially planned to dismiss her thoughts as nothing, switched up and pulled out a photo from when she was younger. She asked Sapona if she still looked the same, and to her, she did. When Myobi asked if someone in her past would recognize her if they crossed paths, her reply was positive, as according to her, only someone who didn't see her as significant wouldn't recognize her. Immediately, memories of Halleck in the old days crossed her mind. She was glad there was a possibility that he didn't value her. Days went by smoothly after that. Myobi carried out her duties as usual, until the day she got to his room and he already had his bath. At first, she thought that meant she was free for the night. But no, he had other plans that involved her sharing his bed with him that night. A gust of shock overwhelmed her, but he promised he didn't have any deep intentions towards her. This was just a rehearsal. What did he mean by rehearsal, though? At the time, she had no idea and hoped to find that out later. On getting to Halleck's room, Myobi was given a nightgown to change into. He had handpicked it, and she saw it as the expensive noble lady standard gown it was. With the gown properly fitted, she joined him on his bed and sought to know the type of rehearsal they were engaging in. To her surprise, he just lay by her, claiming he intended to practice falling asleep with her in his arms. However, she didn't believe he was going to fall asleep in such a position, until he did, leaving her awake with an opportunity to end his life. He hurt her people, and that was her best shot at him. Still, she couldn't bring herself to finish him off. Hating him, but not being able to kill him, felt like a curse to Myobi, and she spent the rest of her night mourning the opportunity she had thrown away. Not being able to kill him should have been a sign that it was time for her to leave the mansion. But Myobi didn't see it that way. She continued as an undercover maid. A little long into her stay at the estate, she noticed the place was busier than usual and leaned on Sapona to explain to her what was happening. From what she was told, their master was hosting a banquet, and since he rarely hosted one, every big shot in paradise was going to be there. She guessed Myobi missed this because she was serving baths when it was announced. Meanwhile, Golden Girl was busy hoping she could get more info about the estate during the banquet. Since they were on the topic, Myobi wanted to know the purpose of the banquet. It was usually to celebrate something, but this time things were different. Halleck was going to choose a wife. As soon as she heard this, Myobi lost strength in her hands and accidentally dropped the plate she was holding. Was she shocked? We can't say, but she rushed to gather the pieces and ended up cutting herself. Sapona tagged her clumsy for this, even though she saw the injury as a little blessing in disguise. Why? because the head maid announced that she was relieved of the duty of handling baths. While helping with the wound, Sapona continued that, although a reason was not given for her being dismissed of bath duty, she guessed Haluk was trying to preserve himself for just his wife's eyes. She let Myobi go when she was done and urged her to be more careful, without knowing how affected she was by the news. Haluk and his flirty ways had gotten to her head to the level where that evening she accidentally roamed into the corridor leading to his bedchamber. She was irritated by him pulling closer to her, only to want to get married to a noble lady. Still, she found herself going to his room, even after being relieved of his bath duty. As soon as she came to her senses, she turned to leave, when she heard a female's voice that grabbed her attention. By his room was Haluk and a woman, and Myobi tried to force herself not to care. Truly, she was hurt that the rehearsal was probably for the woman he was discussed with, among other things that annoyed her. Fortunately for Myobi, she was able to suck her frustration in and leave. Her exit, nevertheless, wasn't soundless, so Haluk heard her. Sure, he was talking to a woman, but she didn't know that woman was actually the head maid. They were probably discussing important stuff, but he has to pause their conversation to check what made the noise he heard. That's when he noticed Myobi at the end of the corridor and wondered why she was roaming the halls this late. He also noticed her injury. Even so, he let her go. The days after that, she didn't even have time to think about Haluk and his wife-to-be. She was too crowded with work that left her unable to take a breather. Still, she was glad. The extra work gave her the opportunity to get a hold of documents that contained the layout of the mansion, staff movements, and shift changes. Of course, she memorized every key detail she came across, hoping to use all the information for the perfect hit on Haluk. She was going to end his life on the day of the banquet and was making sure everything went smoothly and nothing connected her to the hit. On the day of the banquet, unlike all the nobles in the resonated hall, Myobi was miles away from actual happiness. That didn't stop her from showing up with Sapona, who was so anxious about the large attendance that she feared she'd mess up and get sacked. She had no idea Myobi came ready for her hit, as she consoled her with kind words and a promise that she wasn't going to get laid off. Moreover, if she succeeded in handling Haluk, there'd be no one to serve. And that's all that mattered to her. Everything else was a distraction, although she truly saw Sapona as a friend, her first friend in paradise. She hoped the poor girl wouldn't be held as an accomplice if things went south, but Sapona was all cheers after being encouraged, unaware of the danger that loomed. She was so happy that she aired out her belief that Myobi could stumble upon the Meldern estate where she claimed she came from. It was also the place the original Karen worked, and a place a certain blonde stranger was suddenly interested in. He wanted to know if she was the Karen that used to work at that estate, and the only option she has was go play along. She feared he was someone who recognized the actual Karen, or knew a lot about that estate and didn't want to get involved with him. To save herself, she tried to leave. The man saw it as disrespectful and pulled her back, causing her to fall. At the top of his voice, he asserted he didn't look like she ever worked at the Meldern estate, so he wanted to know who she really was. Murmuring started, and the rumors of her being an imposter began to arise. The change in tide was abrupt and left her with one option, which was to abandon her goal and flee. Sadly, before she could make a move, Haluk was in front of her. Cheekily, he called her by her name, Myobi Hiddenite, and asked her to stand up. Oh boy, her cover was blown. She didn't know when he discovered who she was and why he casually stretched a hand to her, asking her to take it. But she did know she was in trouble. The blonde guy kept stressing on her impersonating a maid from his estate, and Haluk, noticing that Myobi was trembling so much, salvaged the situation in the weirdest way possible by saying she was his betrothed. He knew the angry blonde guy was the second son of House Meldern, Leon Meldern, and he wanted Myobi to be punished severely, but he couldn't do that after he introduced her as his betrothed. The whole hall was talking. The union between a maid and a man as noble as him was news, but it meant she was untouchable. She needed a way out of the little problem she was in, so she said nothing. But after he left to attend to other things, she couldn't comprehend how things spiraled so quickly in the wrong direction. She couldn't tell if the talk of her being betrothed to him was an act or the truth. The whole impersonating Karen act was no longer a problem to her. She had bigger things to worry about. Nevertheless, it didn't stop it from being a big deal to Leon Meldern, who promised her she wouldn't be lucky the next time they crossed paths. The banquet continued, no less, giving Myobi the time to try to do what she should have done long ago: escape. As soon as she was caught by Haluk's others, she was detained in the basement with no way to escape. All she could do was bang on the door and demand to be let out until she gave up and surveyed her prison. On the bed was a change of clothes, so it was clear he planned to imprison her whether she tried to run or not. But that doesn't bother her. She had thought he was going to kill her the moment he realized who she was, yet she couldn't understand why he saved her instead. Next thing she knew, the head maid called her "my lady" and promised to send in someone to tend to her personally. Truly, Myobi was not feeling the title. She also wasn't cool with how down and bruised Sapona looked when she walked in. She was the personal assistant the head maid was talking about. But nothing mattered to her more at that moment than how Sapona was feeling. She threw a barrage of questions at the maid, all aimed at checking if she was all right. But in return, she got a cold vibe from her. She didn't want to do anything more than help her change into her nightgown. As she settled down to let her do her job, Maybe scolded herself for being too relieved to see Sapona, that she forgot she was the last person she wanted to see. She could tell the burden of her actions was placed on the poor maid because it was she who brought her into the mansion and felt guilty for that. She hoped to make amends, but once she was done helping her out, in a formal tone, Sapona announced she was leaving. Myobi advised her against them being formal with each other because it made things awkward, but the maid refused to listen. She declared that it was wrong to address someone of her status casually, proof that she was disappointed in Myobi for keeping her in the dark since they met. She was filled with remorse, no doubt, and apologized to Sapona, promising to talk to the head maid to reassign her duties. Myobi assumed she was unbearable to be around, acknowledging that she messed up when she hid her identity. She promised to clear her name, though, and planned to take all the blame for her actions. Sapona was stunned by the excuse of an apology, as that wasn't what she wanted to hear. Casting status aside, she lashed out, forbidding Myobi from saying she wasn't part of it. Sure, she had to hide her identity, but Sapona wished she didn't hide it from her, too. They spent so much time together, yet she knew nothing and looked like a fool in front of everyone. She actually understood the need to keep her identity a secret at the start, but there was a lot of time after that for her to come clean. She thought they were friends and not being treated like one, left her in tears. Myobi, in an attempt to salvage the situation, affirmed that they were friends. She just didn't know she could trust her enough to open up and feared she would have been banished if her true identity was discovered. On hearing this, Sapona called her a fool for thinking so shallow. There was no chance of her snitching. Also, whatever the circumstances, she believed a person needed at least one person on their side. Those words reminded her of when she was the little girl who used to cling to her parents. She did that because she didn't think anyone liked her as much as they did. But her mother promised her that in future she would meet people who actually cared about her as much as they did. She admonished Myobi to open her heart to said people when the time came. It didn't take her long to see that Sapona was one of those persons, meaning the next step was opening up. For the next couple minutes, she lectured her on her gruesome past and run-in with Haluk. It was a lot to take in and hard to believe, yet it didn't take any convincing at all for her to trust Myobi's story and promise to stick with her and help her escape. That night, their bond was rekindled, but she had to leave. She had spent more time with her than supposed and needed to return to her quarters before anyone knew she wasn't there. They agreed they'd see the next day, and parted ways on a good note. Nevertheless, on her way back, all Sapona could think about was the suffering Myobi endured. She was glad things in the mansion were calming down and planned to be more attentive, for her friend's sake. Everything was looking smooth for them until she realized she forgot one glaring detail. Her master, Haluk. He intercepted Sapona on her way back to the quarters and sarcastically commended her for being so devoted to serving Myobi that she stayed with her until such late an hour. He asked how she was doing, and the maid did her best to wear a smile when she said Myobi was doing okay. While talking with him, she could tell he was the only one who wasn't fooled, and tried her best to hide how much she resented him. Out of concern for Myobi, she asked him what he was doing at the basement so late, a question he found funny. He didn't think he needed a reason to visit his future wife. A woman he locked in the basement. That alone makes Sapona disgusted by him calling Myobi that. But she doesn't show it, the only reason why he permitted her to leave. Nevertheless, she refused to listen, blocking him from advancing to Myobi's room. She didn't think before taking such a risky step, but she couldn't stop there and lied that she stopped him in the furtherance of Myobi's orders that no one was to enter her chambers while she slept. Haluk was a smart man. That's why he saw Sapona as not just a problem, but also a valuable asset. In that vein, he reminded her that she started working at his estate 2 years prior. He recalled that at the time she started, she was the breadwinner of her family, and believed she still was, which meant she valued the job. He didn't mind firing her, and if he did, he was aware she wouldn't find work elsewhere, because she wouldn't have a recommendation letter. His ice-cold words pierced Sapona. Still, that wasn't all he had to say. He had a proposal for her, and left after he shared with her what he had in mind. His next stop was the basement still, but he met Myobi sleeping and decided not to bother her until morning. With flowers in hand, he greeted her as soon as she woke up, but she responded by pulling as far away from him as possible. His presence startled her, but he alleged that he wasn't there to harm her. His claim didn't make her happy, though. It made her want to know why he spared her life. Initially, Haluk made it sound like he spared her because of how close they were in the past. But she didn't buy it, called it a load of nonsense, and that made him confess his true motive was finding out how she crossed from Proserpina to paradise. Maybe a part of him was happy to see her, but she knew his curiosity made him keep quiet even after he realized her true identity. According to him, she was wrong. He then pulled closer to her to tell her that if she was just a tool, he would have finished her off the day he finished off her village. That statement angered her. It made her want to beat him to a pulp. But when she stretched to attack him, she was stopped by an ankle chain. Last night, there were no restraints, so she wonders when he bound her. In the split second when she was thinking about the chain, he pulled out the soul frequency gun she created when she was 16 and pointed it at her. He asked if she remembered it. Of course she did, though she didn't have much time with it. On the other hand, he did, and he used that time to study it. His study helped him discover that the gun had the ability to kill the soul while leaving the owner's body intact. Since her, he had done various tests, all failed, leaving her as the sole success to such a worthy invention. That was his final reason for keeping her alive. It was truly a sinister thing to say. The man seemed to have lost his mind. He showed her that he didn't care about her pain and gave her choice. Spend the rest of her life confined to the basement as lady of the house or die by his hand. Both options meant hell to Miyobi, so she lashed out. She thought it inhumane for him to ask her to decide between a cursed life with him and death by his hand, after she already died by his hand once. He killed her old happier self by betraying the village and abandoning her. She spat on him and called him the most vile thing she loved. But he didn't see her feelings for him as a thing of the past. He pulled her to himself and seemingly promised not to abandon her again if she let go of everything. Miyobi decided to play Haluk's game for the time being by accepting to marry him. He was happy by her choice, but he had to leave and promised to check back as soon as he had time. When he left, Miyobi returned to her original mood. She was glad that she had bought some time for herself and thought deeply about all that one thing that mattered to her: revenge. Her life wasn't important anymore. She could have easily picked death, but she didn't have want to clock out without avenging her people. Elsewhere, Sapona underwent a struggle of her own. Before her was Miyobi's breakfast, and Haluk had instructed her the previous night to dose it with a serum that would make her easy to manipulate. Since the order came from Haluk, she couldn't avoid it. He was master of the house and probably had maids spying on her. Sapona could feel their watchful eyes. If she didn't comply, she suspected he'd go after her family. For them, she reminded herself that he said the serum was only fatal after prolonged use. She planned to use it on Miyobi's food just once and dosed it with a tiny drop. Minutes later, there was a knock at the door and she assumed it was Sapona. She hadn't eaten all day and permitted the person at the door to enter. Joyfully, she sat up to welcome her, but that joy was short-lived because it wasn't her right-hand woman at the door, but Haluk. She thought he was going to stay away from her until the wedding, like he said. He planned to do that, really, but he heard she had refused entry to every servant but her personal maid, Sapona. For that reason, he decided to intervene personally by running her a bath himself. Reluctantly, she let him do his thing at the start, but then he started to act all caring and she changed her mind. She wanted the servants to help her out instead, but he refused. Taking care of her was something he did in the past, and he felt it wasn't supposed to make her feel strange. Then and there, he promised to love her like an ordinary husband should. A declaration she saw as a lie he told without a change of expression. Still, he stayed and did more checks on her. That's how he was able to notice the bruises on her shackled leg. From it, he could tell she had been moving a lot, as he suspected. He then undid the shackles to take care of her ankle. He suddenly got curious about whether or not he was the only one who ever got intimate with her. She replied that he wasn't, which was probably a lie, but it got him angry. Although he didn't try to show it, his actions did, as he pulled closer for another time with her. This she wasn't comfortable with, especially since he had told her that she was nothing but proof of the success of soul destruction. To that, he had one response: the marriage night rehearsal. He claimed he did the rehearsal because from that day, he decided she was his wife. He tried to explain that he really did love her, yet Miyobi understood two things from what he was saying. One was that he knew who she was all along. And two, that Haluk was lying. She knew him long enough to tell that whenever he lied, he did it with a smile. All his efforts were aimed at trying to sway her, so she decided to act swayed by allowing him another night with her. When he was done, he left her to the care of Sapona, who he called in advance. By the time she got there, Miyobi was dressed and in bed. She had to wake her, after which she gave her some light scolding for making her worry by rejecting meals from other servants and starving herself. The mood was warm. Miyobi was glad to see a familiar face, even more glad when Sapona informed her they'd be eating together. The reason she gave for this was that she wanted to make sure she finished her meal. Honestly, it wasn't. What she was doing had something to do with the serum Haluk gave her. She showed that with how worried she looked when Miyobi began to choke. She feared it was something else, but it was just the meal being too spicy. Soon worry shifted to her, the moment her face turned pale and she started hyperventilating. Miyobi tried to find out what was wrong, but all she did was apologize for promising to stand by her and escape the mansion with her. At the end of her apology, she collapsed. Worried, Miyobi rushed over to her and screamed for help. For some reason, she didn't attempt to use her powers to help Sapona. She just watched a surge of bright energy escape from her and trail away like footsteps. The farther it got, the more of her memories Miyobi was able to see. That's how she got to know about the serum Haluk gave her to dip in her food. She saw how Sapona asked for a second plate of food after dosing the first one. Although she told the other maids she needed it to eat with Myobi as a way of encouraging her to eat too, the truth was that she wanted to give her the pure one and take the drugged meal. She was unwilling to betray her friend and bet her life on Haluk's word. Since he said it was harmless, she had to be sure. Turned out it wasn't. She was out and needed help. With Myobi's assistance, it arrived much sooner than supposed. So soon that Myobi started to suspect the maids that stormed in. Much as they claimed they wanted to help, she couldn't believe them, suspecting they planned to take advantage of the situation and dispose Sapona. Hence the reason why she sternly asked if they were taking her for treatment and demanded to go with them. The maids refused and used Haluk as their excuse for doing so. According to them, he ordered that she shouldn't be let out of the basement and they couldn't disobey. Myobi wasn't sure they were taking Sapona to get treated, but there was nothing she could do but helplessly watch them get ready to take her away. She stayed patient until one of the maids dropped a side comment about her being stuck and unable to do anything. The other one tried to tell her to pipe down since she guessed Myobi could hear her, but it was too late. She was both pissed and determined not to lose the one person in paradise who had sacrificed for her, as she ran towards the maid with a candlestick. Before her victim knew it, she had her by the hair with one hand. With the other, she held the candle, ready to burn. She was a woman who crawled from the bottom to the top and gave the maid an option. Take her to the physician, or she'd get hurt so bad they'd call a physician for her. The more time she wasted, the more agitated Myobi got. If not for the head maid who stepped in, she would have lived up to her word. It's funny that she was conveniently in the area. Nevertheless, Myobi was more concerned about Sapona than she was about that. She demanded to be taken to the place where they planned to take her friend for treatment, so as to monitor her recovery with her own eyes, but her request was denied. The head maid reestablished that the only person who could give the command was Haluk, but she didn't mind them treating Sapona in the basement for her sake. Deciding to trust their word, Myobi let the maid go, ordering her to get the physician. She promised her that if she delayed and something happened to Sapona, she was going to let it slide. In an hour or so, the said physician arrived, and he kept monitoring her for the next few days. He was one of those well-fed types and looked plenty shady from the start. He administered nothing to Sapona, gave no diagnosis, but claimed he was unfamiliar with the type of poison she took. Just a few minutes after he came for his latest checkup, he tried to leave, just as he had done before. He promised he'd check back the following day, but she wasn't having it and grabbed his briefcase to try and stop him. To her shock, its contents poured out, bundles of money and a vial. He hurriedly gathered the money and dashed out of the room, but he forgot the vial, giving Myobi the chance to observe it. During her observation, she noticed that it was the poison she saw in Sapona's memories. She then understood that the so-called physician had been making Sapona worse all along. It was definitely a trick from Haluk. He fooled her again, and was about to cost her the life of another person she held dear. Nonetheless, when Myobi rested on her sick friend, she felt a bulge in her pocket and was moved to search it. She was stunned to pull out a key. She guessed it was a trick, but it gave her a final chance to save Sapona's life. She refused to miss in, put a few things in place, and then bailed. It didn't take long for the whole mansion to be on its toes searching for her. Plus the fact that she was carrying someone who had passed out made escaping difficult. Yet she didn't have a choice. The plan was to escape with Sapona and take her for treatment at the hospital in the village she used to work as unknown. I wonder where her healing ability went, though, but she was sure the hospital was going to give her proper treatment. During her escape, she paused by a bush to listen in on a conversation between the head maid and few other maids. The older lady dismissed her as pretty and weak, as she praised the mansion for being a large labyrinth, too large for her to escape freely with extra weight. In truth, she wasn't fully wrong. Myobi was exhausted and wanted to pass the time in the bush before continuing her escape. The only problem was that she accidentally made a sound that caught the head maid's attention. She then ordered that the bush be searched, but a large explosion in the kitchen wing made her change orders. She initially wanted to split their staff into two, one to handle the fire and another to find Myobi. However, another explosion, plus some lives being at stake, made her change her order. She wanted everyone to focus on quenching the fire and saving lives, as she regarded that as more of a priority than the runaway betrothed. The two explosions happening right when Myobi needed them were no coincidence, by the way. It was all in her plan, the plan she originally intended to use and finish Haluk off. She prioritized Sapona over him and was glad that all the studying of servants' shifts and the mansion's layouts finally paid off. She was glad they underestimated her. It allowed her to get so close to the back gate that it felt like a home stretch away, at least until she got shot. She didn't think anyone would have been smart enough to figure out the route she was taking, but she was wrong. Haluk happened to be a tiny step ahead of her. He praised her for being unpredictable, but he didn't shoot to kill. That was why he used the soul frequency manipulation gun Myobi made when she was younger. He wanted to see if the gun would work a second time, but it did not affect her. That wasn't a problem, though. He still looked to capture her, while she desperately tried to get away. As he watched her stagger to her feet, He could see how determined she was and taunted her for being so eager to escape that she burned down servants who tried to stop her. She laughed at the statement, though, and mocked him for knowing nothing about her, even after they spent most of her childhood together. At the headmaid's end, the fire was almost out when they realized that there were no servants in the fire, just hair, meat, and clothes. She had deceived them, and the headmaid didn't like it one bit. Myobi, on the other hand, bragged that although she prioritized her escape, she was never going to kill or betray anyone to get it. She wasn't like him, and he could agree with that. Aside from her good heart, he recognized her strong will and compared her to a wildflower that took root wherever the wind scattered it. I mean, after he destroyed all her bonds, her home, and any future it could have had, she still survived. He urged her to stop fighting and come to his side of the fence, but she refused, once more. Although she knew how lavish a good life in paradise could be, and how it would never get boring there, unlike Proserpina, she found the place utterly repulsive. She had no desire to partake in a filthy place that thrived off the blood of her people and threatened to stab Haluk if he came close to her. But he couldn't stay away, since he had determined not to let her go. Myobi assured him that clinging to her there wouldn't work after he tried to kill her in the past. But he didn't stop. He actually claimed he never wanted her dead, and although it didn't matter, he wanted to know why she was trying to leave him. If she planned to end his life, he thought she had a better chance at doing that at the mansion. His declaration made it clear that he knew all along that she infiltrated his mansion to murder him, but that didn't matter anymore. She wasn't like him, a sucker for his mission, and saw saving Sapona as more important than ending his life. Staying at his mansion for the past few months had taught her that although she wanted him dead, she wasn't willing to end him at the expense of everything she held dear. He found that funny, since he thought she valued him. But she didn't, and made it clear that all she felt towards him was hate. He didn't mind that, but was slightly hurt that she was willing to let go of all the bad blood between them and leave just like that. The man was insane, no doubt, and she wasn't ready to entertain his insanity any longer. She made it clear to him that he wasn't the victim. She was. She wasn't leaving him. He left her all those years ago. She was young, confused, and kept trying to tell herself that he didn't abandon her on purpose, and what happened wasn't his doing. Her memories of the day he left haunted her, but all he could say was that he never left. He only returned home. He was raised in paradise from childhood for the sake of the land and the sky. Until then, she thought he was the adopted son of Surgood. Even so, his confession didn't explain why he had wasted the people of Proserpina. To make it clear to her, he added that he was born to infiltrate Proserpina's revolution. Monitoring them was his duty, and he had no other future or desire of his own to pursue. Still, amidst his service, he met her. The one person who made him feel like he wasn't just a pawn, but something more. He took off his eye patch, hoping he'd be more convincing that way, as he closed the gap between them. He begged her to stay every step of the way, disallowing her from noticing his servants closing in on them. All Myobi's focus was on Haluk and how he smiled whenever he lied, until he got close and she realized he wasn't smiling. In other words, he was telling the truth. He asked her not to leave, but afterwards he stabbed himself, a move that confused her to the bone. She didn't understand why he did it, and he didn't get why she was unhappy when she wanted him dead. Really, she did, but in a better way. Myobi couldn't see why Haluk stabbed himself, but had no time to figure it out, with all the maids and butlers that were a few meters away. They thought she tried to kill him, and he was a noble in paradise, so that was a big deal. Yet while she was being chased with Sapona in her arm, Haluk lay there smiling, showing no care to the head maid and her talks of bringing a physician. He was more focused on how he had his precious gem, Myobi, in his arms, and then let her go. Nevertheless, he was determined to show her that she had no place in paradise except by his side. Anywhere else meant she was going to suffer torment until she was cast out as a stranger. He suffered too nonetheless, dreams from a memory of him hunting with Surgood, that always ended with Myobi almost ending his life. He woke up from his most recent dream with his cut reopened and his mind on Myobi. She had been in his dreams more frequently than normal, and at first he thought it was because his feelings towards her had grown. If it wasn't that, he considered it being because she might actually kill him in the long run, and scoffed at that thought. On Myobi's end, she made it into the village safely, rushed through the empty alley, and arrived at the shelter where she worked as unknown. There she met Bella, the nurse who worked there. The kind nurse recognized her upon entry, and seeing that she was with a patient, the kind nurse skipped pleasantries and led her to a bed where she dropped Sapona. She hoped they had the necessary medicine for her friend, but also worried about the wanted poster spread across the entire village and even the shelter. Her only chance of making it out without getting ratted out to Haluk was keeping her cloak on. She kept it on as the nurse gave her diagnosis. She realized that the poison was severe, and leaving Sapona without a proper antidote was going to be fatal for her. Limb paralysis, and even worse, the only cure for her was with the Meldern estate, home of Leon Meldern, the blonde hottie who hates her guts. Myobi was well aware of the harm she could face from going there, Yet, that didn't stop her from deciding to stick her neck out to retrieve the medicine herself. The antidote was some rare medicine that the Meldern estate managed by itself, and no matter how many times Bella and the shelter begged for its ingredients, they were turned down. Myobi believed her, though. She knew that shelters got provisions from donations of noble families. Bella bragged about the cute because she knew it was really in the Meldern estate, but she needed a way in. Since she couldn't stroll in from the front gate, she asked Bella to help her sneak in, and the nurse did, even though she scolded her thoroughly before doing so. At the estate, Myobi remembered that Bella instructed her to start her search at the place in the estate where the lights never went off. It was rumored that they sorted their medicine there, so Myobi obeyed her. On getting to the room, she noticed someone was there. She actually planned to knock the person out with a sedative, but hesitated when she found out that the person was Leon. When she finally summoned up the courage to knock him out, she accidentally kicked a bottle, alerting him to her presence before she could get to him. It didn't take him a second look to realize she was Haluk's fiancé, so he demanded she state her business or he would call for the guards. He probably didn't know about what went down in Haluk's estate, so she quickly told him that she came to get medicine to save her life, after which she planned to go on her way. Leon misunderstood her intentions. He believed she wanted to steal again and decided he wasn't going to let her go. Myobi then decided to use her ability to knock him out. She didn't want to use it because of the side effects, but she didn't have a choice. As she moved to knock him out, someone stopped Leon from making any harsh moves. It was a sick person on a bed, and he called her Karen. She asked him to calm down, and he listened, deciding to go out and discuss with Myobi because of her. Outside, she thought back to the person in the room. She guessed that the person was Karen, since he called her that. If so, it made no sense for the second son of a noble family to be tending to a maid. She had problems of her own to focus on, though, Sapona's health. Myobi was surprised when Leon asked if she wanted to steal for Sapona. She began to feel uneasy. She didn't say who she came to get the medicine for, but he understood her. She was a person of perfect health, and he understood that when someone of perfect health went that far for someone else, it was someone they held dear. He understood that kind of desperation, as it was one he felt for the woman in the room they stepped out from. That woman was Karen, his childhood friend who fell out with the nobility and was banished from the Meldern estate. She ended up in the Billionaire estate afterwards, and that was why he went for the banquet, to check on her and see how she was doing. He was surprised when he got there and saw Myobi impersonating her and accused her of doing it with the intention of stealing from him. His accusation pissed Myobi off to the bone, and she charged at him, seizing him by the collar as she made it clear that she didn't infiltrate the mansion for money, but to protect the bonds she made and take back all Haluk had stolen from her. Her eyes burned with so much passion that Leon was left awestruck. She ordered him not to insult her honor, but as she made those demands, she pushed him against the balcony and he asked her to calm down. It was he who had the right to feel angry since she stole his friend's identity. Concerning her need for the drug, he felt he deserved an explanation, and she calmed down to give him one. She explained that the only person who cared for her in the Billionaire estate was poisoned and hovered between life and death. The more time she wasted, the more she deteriorated. She begged him to give her an antidote, but he was curious to know why she didn't just make a request in Haluk's name. Her silence made him understand that the rumors he heard about her stabbing Haluk were true. He thought she had lost her mind to get caught in something like that, even though she claimed it was a trap. He feared that if word got out that he helped her with an antidote, he was going to get into some serious trouble, and he didn't want that. Leon wanted her to see herself as lucky since he decided not to arrest her and was willing to let her go. But that didn't do. She needed the antidote for Sapona and managed to use his love for Karen to get him to find a way to get the antidote to her friend at the shelter without raising suspicion. Once they had reached an agreement, she thanked him, but her time made him blush and feel so flustered that he ordered her to leave immediately. His excuse was that the visit wasn't a proper one. And he had a point. She returned to the shelter while Leon returned to Karen, feeling like he had made the wrong decision. 15 days later, at the Billionaire estate, Haluk had a meeting with some of his staff. The purpose of the meeting was important to state matters, but none of that seemed to concern Haluk. The only thing on his mind was Myobi and how he hadn't been getting any reports about her. According to some members of his staff, they couldn't catch her soul frequency on soul scanners. They didn't know she had severed her soul as a child, but he did, and kept it to himself. To find her, he suggested they search for her using her behavioral patterns and habits, but he was the only one with any proper knowledge about her. At the meeting, he asked himself what the most likely place she was going to go and soon realized it was the library. She always ran to books when faced with an impossible situation, so he ordered them to focus their search on every library in Paradise. He wasn't wrong. As he spoke, she was at the biggest library in Paradise, the Lighthouse of Alexandria, the repository of Paradise's knowledge. Before stepping in, she noticed the place was swarming with guards and recognized that going by herself was risky, but she needed to know more about what Haluk said on the day she fled. He said Paradise was his home. He was born to monitor Proserpina's revolution, and he didn't act by his own free will. Myobi had thought he betrayed her people for his selfish gain, but that bombing confession changed everything. He became a blur to her, and she needed to know more about him. Why his destiny was infiltrating Proserpina, and what Paradise was hiding. On her way into the library to get her answers, she was stopped by a guard for what he called a routine check. The previous day, Myobi knew the library as a place that was freely accessible to anyone. The new development meant she couldn't freely walk in, so she tried to back out, but more guards crowded her, demanding to confirm her identity. Then and there, she began to panic, and they kept approaching her slowly, intending to nab her when Leon stepped in. He called her darling, and with his arm on her shoulder and a claim that she was his beloved, he made the guys turn a blind eye to them, and that helped her get in. Once they were in the clear, instead of thanking Leon, Myobi scolded him for interfering. He claimed he was passing by and stumbled upon her predicament, so he helped out. Still, she didn't thank him for his helping hand. Instead, she warned him to stay away from her. She knew that if he got caught, she wouldn't be able to help him. But that didn't break his will. It fueled him to offer to help her. Not just because he knew she was being pursued unjustly, but also because he had watched the suffering of the lower class in Paradise go on for too long. He was sick of it, and that was his way of fighting back. Moved by his speech, Myobi asked him how he planned to help her. For starters, he wanted to help her navigate the library and get to places there that she couldn't, but feared it was going to take a lifetime to read everything she needed. That wasn't a problem for Myobi, however. Gathering vast amounts of information was her specialty. He didn't believe her until he watched her finish bulky books at an unimaginable speed. The more he observed her, the more fascinating she became to him, and he began to wonder what kind of life she led before coming to him. He probably began to have a little crush on her. On the night of day 1 of their search, Myobi stumbled upon an ancient document that contained information on Project Icarus. It was the procedure that led to the creation of Paradise, and the document she stumbled upon contained the 3rd attempt to make the dream come true. Lastly unchecked, the news going around was that Paradise flew on the first try. To think that was a lie. Or maybe it wasn't, because the document didn't contain information on Paradise, but on the last holy night in Proserpina. The one who claimed Myobi's people. While Leon and other members of Paradise were told that it was a night involving a brawl between Paradise's armed forces and terrorists in Proserpina, Myobi knew the information they got was flawed. She was horrified and annoyed to see that the document before her contained the time, place, and even the specific number of people to show up for the battle. It made it glaring that the whole thing was pre-orchestrated by Paradise officials. Leon, upon checking out the document, was equally horrified, especially since it contained information on past uprisings, the suppression and exploitation of Proserpina's people, and more. It basically highlighted the inequality which was the backbone of Paradise's success. Myobi went to the counter to see if she could get more documents on the subject, but was informed that it was checked out and would be returned in 100 years. The person who checked it out listed it as H, so she dared to guess it was Haluk. Seeing how determined she was, Leon quietly advised that they return to their seats. She wasn't with her cloak and risked getting identified if they remained in the open. She listened but was angered by the thought of the information she needed being stored in Haluk's personal study. She wondered what kind of information was so dangerous that it had to be sealed away for 100 years. Leon too felt bad. He was eager to take a peek at the document, but his suggestion gave Myobi a new idea. She could try to get into Haluk's mind. She wondered if that was possible, and her search took another turn as Leon told her there was. He escorted her to a rather shady section of the library where books on the method existed, but warned her against it because it was seen as a societal taboo. She was able to convince him that someone documented the techniques for the sake of those who would come after them, and pulled out the first book determined to figure out a way to step into Haluk's dreams. Her search eventually led her to the Forbidden Tome, Semnographia, a book with forbidden techniques that happened to contain information on a way to cross to another person's subconscious. The book phrased the human dream as both a prison and a key to vast lands. It also has not just a say to journey through dreams, but also a warning that it could alter reality, and it was so dangerous that every traveler needed to ensure they had a way back to the waking world. As Myobi prepared for her voyage, Leon watched and likened her to a witch. He didn't think anyone normal could manifest the methods in the Forbidden Tomes. He heard only that those who lived before Paradise existed could endure it, but she taught him differently, revealing that she could manage the technique because of an accident she suffered as a child. Since then, she had some knowledge of theories behind spellcraft and the flow of magic. Still, all that wasn't enough here. What helped her out was proof of their connection, the remnant of a gemstone she gave him when she was a child. Leon thought it was risky to think Haluk still had his own half, but she didn't mind the risk. She was willing to gamble her fate. Plus, like her, he was searching for gemstones others hardly perceived. That gave her hope that he kept what she gave him. She had all she needed for her transition and thanked Leon for giving her a place to hide at. She then asked him to take care of Sapona and shut him out. The man was left out to dry and actually felt bad. He hoped he had a chance with her, and she made it look as though he never did. On Myobi's end, she managed to get into Halleck's dreams. Sadly, it was the nightmare he kept having about hunting, and she was in the way of the deer. Obviously, she got shot, but she saw Halleck before passing out and coming back to the waking world. At first, she panicked, but then she found it odd that Halleck's dream rejected her. Rejections only happened when the subconscious allowed it, and it turned out Halleck was subconsciously rejecting her. She guessed that as he had become her nightmare, she managed to become his. Yet she took a sedative and tried stepping into his dream again. On her next try, she merged with the dream, and before he could shoot, she popped up behind him and tried to grab him. To her surprise, he evaded her swiftly, running as fast as his little legs could carry. As he ran deeper into his dream, she followed, eventually tailing him to a room with an extremely large corridor that had no end. The room had pillars, and a little observation helped Myobi see that its pillars had words on them. That made her guess that the room was her dream abyss, and she was going to find the memory she was looking for in one of the doors of that room. Her first try, surprisingly, was Halleck's memory from back when he was a baby, and his parents tossed him into Proserpina, hoping that the people would save her and raise her until he was old enough to sabotage them and disappear. She watched as his parents dropped him, and Surgud picked him up and took him in, proving to her that Halleck didn't lie when he said he was dropped from paradise. She hoped that by following the trail before her, she was bound to find the information she needed, and entered the door without noticing Halleck in the room she had left. While on the path she was on, Myobi thought about what little Halleck's childhood memories could do for her, but she still looked forward to finding something worthwhile, and ended up in an unfamiliar place. With her was Haluk on the floor hyperventilating. The fella seemed to think the door was locked, and she apologized. I turned to leave only to get stopped by him. He claimed someone slipped an urge booster in his drink, but she wanted nothing to do with him in the state he was in. Sadly, she had no power to resist, and watched herself live through Haluk's first time getting intimate. It was with a scum who drugged him and planned to have a baby for him, and so she could get a free ticket to paradise. She actually felt bad for Haluk, until she watched him switch and go from being used to the one doing the using. It was then Myobi switched places with the woman from his memory and was trying her best to return to the waking world. Eventually, she was able to escape from that door of his memory, after which she returned to the corridor and was attached by a form of Haluk that seemed very conscious of her presence and asked her to get out of his dream. In the waking world, a week had passed since Myobi asked Leon to take care of Sapona, and he outdid himself to the point that he was sure he was going to get praised by Myobi. He was in his carriage praising himself nevertheless when he noticed a crowd of people that caught his attention. The reason why the crowd gathered was unknown, so he went to figure out what was up. To his surprise, it was Sapona. She was awake and confused about where she was. On Myobi's end, she too has woken up, acknowledging that it happened by force. She was still in shock when a messenger eagle from the Meldern estate flew over with a letter to her from Leon. In the letter, he revealed that Sapona was awake. It was good news to her, but little did she know that her joy was going to be short-lived. Haluk was onto her? First, he suspected she was the one lurking in his dreams, mostly because the gem she gave him had been glowing since he woke up. While observing it, he got word from a maid that Myobi was spotted in the premises of their national library. She explained that although they tried to apprehend her, their forces were stopped by Leon. He couldn't understand why the quiet and charitable second son of the Meldern estate was throwing himself into a problem that didn't concern him. When he thought more about his involvement with Myobi, he realized that the best place for her to get treatment for her friend was the Meldern estate, and he found that very funny. He didn't expect her to be hiding under his nose amidst nobility. Myobi, unaware that she had been figured out, went to meet up with Sapona and Leon at his place. She thanked him for helping her friend, and they got along so well that Sapona began to feel odd and called her aside. She has wanted to know when her bestie became buddies with the second son of the Meldern estate, admitting that she nearly fainted when she woke up to see him. Just as Myobi was about explaining their connection, they were interrupted by Haluk's forces, who came to get her. They knew she was in the room and were ready to force their way in if she didn't step out. If not for the hidden door in the room, Myobi would have been a goner, as it helped them get a head start away from their pursuers. During the escape, she noticed Sapona hadn't fully recovered and was slowing them down, so she decided it was best they split up. Since it was her the search party was after, they were safer without her. Leon agreed and left with Sapona, promising to send reinforcements when he got away from his pursuers. As Leon darted through the caves with Sapona in his arms, the poor girl worried about her friend's safety. Leon didn't, though, because he knew Myobi and she was the bravest person he had ever come across. Little did he know that her braveness was about to be tested when all her plans to escape came to a halt at the bridge she was supposed to escape through that was cut down. She had beaten so many members of the search party to get there, so imagine how frustrated she was. She guessed the fallen bridge was the doing of her pursuers, and they had surrounded her, leaving her with one reasonable option: going with them. To their surprise, however, she took the most daring option: the waterway the bridge was once above. She leaped into it, causing her pursuers to think of a new way to nab here. There was no use following her. All they had to do was wait at the various sections the water was going to end up. In one of those sections was Leon. Waiting patiently as she prayed, she ended up in the tunnel that led to his estate. He got news of what happened to her from an eyewitness at the scene and had his people search fervently for her in the waterway at his estate. He feared for her safety because of how ruthless the Billinger troops seemed to be and their reckless searching of other estates' properties for Myobi. He spent most of his day waiting with the hope that she would end up in the waterway leading to his estate, and it was not in vain. At evening, she crawled out of the water, soaked from head to toe. Leon rushed to her, desperate to welcome her and see if she was okay. For a second, he thought she was happy to see him too and even wanted to lock lips with him. But then she leaned away from his lips and towards his ear to ask him to prepare a room for her to enter Haluk's dream. He was horrified that she wanted to go through with the procedure in her condition, and even more terrified when he noticed the hungry look in her eyes and that she had held on to half of the gem she gave Haluk, while she was being tossed about by harsh water current. To Myobi, she was being very normal. All she was focused on was her obsession to bring Haluk down, an obsession that scared Leon even more. Reluctantly, he agreed to help her with the room on the condition that she recovered first. Haluk was scared of her finding something in his dreams. His word was final. Although he began to wonder who Haluk was to Myobi. Since he had given her an ultimatum, she has no other choice but to rest up by taking a warm bath that helped her clear her head. Thinking back at how much effort Haluk was suddenly putting into finding her, she could see that he was desperate. His desperation seemed to have started when she peered into his dream. That made her guess she had done something to hurt him, and encouraged her to search into his dreams again to find out what exactly he was so desperate to hide. One would wonder why she was so determined. Well, it was because there was a time when all she could do was powerlessly watch the suffering of those dear to her. She never wanted to feel that way again. She didn't want to feel little again, yet she ended up in a part of Haluk's memory where he was just that. It was around the time Surgut introduced him to the people of Proserpina and claimed he was his son. The people seemed happy to meet him, and that made him equally happy, until he realized that in truth they were wary of him and only acted pleased to make Surgut feel okay. They knew the man had lost a son and didn't want to ask too many questions, but when Haluk came across the truth, a shadow was cast over him. A shadow that warned him not to get comfortable in Proserpina because he was a child of paradise and would have to leave their side eventually. It warned him that if he forgot his mission, he was going to be devoured. Haluk believed the shadow was actually a monster. He wanted to have nothing to do with it, so he begged Surgut to teach him how to shoot. He said he needed the lesson, so one day he could strike down the monster that followed him everywhere. But Surgut was too busy to teach him at the moment and promised to do it on a later date. He had a meeting to attend to, prompting him to leave Haluk alone and head out, unaware of the danger the boy would face that night. Even young Haluk didn't think that in his sleep the shadows would emerge to get him, but they did, prompting him to get out of bed and make a run for the door. When he got to it, he hit against it profusely, begging for help, but none came. He begged continuously, until Myobi walked in. Seeing her, he felt a wave of hope and collapsed in her arms. That was when she realized the root of his fears was the darkness within him. She guessed the darkness was caused by warnings given to him before he was sent as a spy, and bit her lip because she actually felt pity for him. Although Myobi hated Haluk, for that night alone in that dream, she stayed with him as his guardian angel, watching over him until he awoke. Luckily for her, she didn't have to wait for long for him to wake up in the dream world. Surprisingly, young Haluk didn't recognize her and asked who she was. Myobi didn't sugarcoat anything. She made it clear that she was someone who had entered his dreams to uncover his secrets. The boy retorted immediately, arguing that he had no secrets, but she didn't buy that. She already knew he was from paradise and let him know she was aware, which made him break down and spill. He confessed that he was indeed from the sky, but had to do what he was asked because they threatened to end him and everyone else if he failed. His confession showed Myobi that he was manipulated by paradise from the start and put in a spot that stopped him from being able to trust anyone. She couldn't let him continue to think the way he did. Nevertheless, she tried to convince him to think about the other children that would suffer if he carried out his mission. For their sake, he needed his guidance and asked him to go with her. If he stuck close to her, she promised he'd be safe from the monsters, and she wasn't lying. He noticed that her presence kept the darkness away, so he began to see her as his guardian angel. That, added with the fact that she entered his dream, made him think she was someone with a certain power. He called the resonance of the soul. From the sparkles she emitted, he believed she was blessed with that gift, and she agreed. It was a rare gift, one to be proud of, but he seemed to know more about it than she did. He knew resonance of the soul was actually called ether, and that anyone could use it long ago. Everything had the glow she emitted, and she showed it to her. He showed her true paradise, the Garden of Eden. She was curious to know how he came about such information. He replied that every time he successfully carried out a task given to him by the Elders of Paradise, he was allowed to ask one question. One day he asked how Paradise was created. That's how he got access to the files on Project Icarus. His reply helped her to be sure he was the one with the missing Project Icarus files, but that didn't concern her at the moment. She wanted to know what happened to Ether, why the power vanished. Haluk revealed to her that it was the doing of the ancients. They took ether from everyone and used it to lift paradise to the sky. As they spoke, it was a sum up of all ether that kept paradise in the afloat. He wasn't supposed to tell her that, he confirmed, but he felt comfortable enough to air out. He saw no crime in opening up and was sad that after she left, the darkness was going to come for him again. Watching him sulk, Mayobi couldn't help but feel bad for him. That feeling made her do something stupid, which was to reveal the location of the gem as she told young Haluk that it helped her connect with his dream, and because of it, she was going to be there to protect him every night. She resented him, no doubt, but she was unable to resent his ginger self. She promised him that no matter what, she was going to be there for him. But before she knew it, she was back at his dream corridor. She didn't know why, but was glad she had gotten information on Project Icarus. Her joy was short-lived, however, as before she could wake up on her own, Haluk's older self had grabbed her and taken out her connection with him. He praised her for hiding it so cleverly before he tainted her for spending time with his younger self, especially since she tried so hard to get away from the real him. Still, he had no hate towards her, if anything. He missed her and shattered the gem with a promise that they'd be seeing each other soon. In the waking world, Mayob's heart raced. She was annoyed that he caught on to her planned, severed their connection, and robbed her of the chance to go into his dreams, but there was nothing she could do about it. Concerning younger Haluk, she felt bad that she was going to go back on her promise and consoled herself with the thought that it was just a dream. He was lost, but there were other children like him littered in paradise. She had to save them from the twisted system that overran paradise, and that meant bringing down the corrupt system paradise thrived on. Then and there, she realized her revenge wasn't just focused on destroying Haluk. Anyway, she didn't have time to waste and planned to get back to her hideout before she got exposed. She knew the Meldern estate wasn't the safest place for her, and she was right. Even so, it was too late. She was about to leave when she noticed commotion in the hallway and a similar eerie feeling. She was on high alert instantly, a key detail that helped her almost escape the second she found out the search party were coming for her. They addressed her as unknown and would have caught her if she didn't hurry to the balcony and threatened to jump off. Since her pursuers went quiet after her threat, Miyobi thought she had one again, but she was wrong. The familiar voice of the head maid of the Billinger estate let her know that. She had suffered since her escape with little resting time, all thanks to her, so she was glad they came face to face again, even though Mayobi wanted nothing to do with her. The head maid was well aware of how slippery her former mistress was. She knew she couldn't take any chances when it came to her. Unlike last time, she took the time to make sure Mayobi wasn't going anywhere by taking Leon and Sapona captive. The way she saw it, they hadn't done anything wrong, meaning she had to bail them out. For their sakes, she tried to use ether, but it didn't respond to her. She was doomed, that she knew, but she didn't want her associates to suffer for her. Against their will, she surrendered, a decision the head maid applauded. Wasting no time, she proceeded to read the ruling of the Elder Council, a document that put Leon on house arrest for housing an enemy of the state. It would have been worse, but his family's status obviously made them act like he got deceived by Mayobi. He was protected, however, she wasn't. She has no one, yet she went against a system that existed long before her. No wonder she was slapped with a long list of offenses, like using of forbidden powers, attempted murder, treason, and attempting to disrupt the peace of paradise. Her sentence? Death. The air in the room at the time was thick. Mayobi was being dragged away, while Leon was untied and asked to remain in the estate until they met with his father and discussed the terms of his house arrest. Once united, they expected him to behave himself, but he didn't, taking out every guard in his way until he got to Mayobi and offered to untie her so she could escape. He acted carelessly before the guards, the head maid, and his staff as he begged Mayobi to escape since dying there was meaningless. The servants began to gossip about him truly being an accomplice of the traitor. They believed his behavior was going to bring an end to his family, something Mayobi couldn't allow. To help him out, she laughed mockingly and acted like she brainwashed him with sorcery. In her act, she released him from her hold, after which she demanded they end the game by taking her away. They did, but as she was being dragged out, it was obvious the servants fell for her act as they felt pity for him, thinking he was under a spell all along. Leon, on the other hand, stopped fighting her position. He could see she was trying to take the fall for her, and reluctantly let her do it. Minutes later, she was led outside, where the villagers watched at a distance with so much to say. All were bad, except the statement from the boy she saved as unknown. While others saw her as a witch, he still thought of her as the woman who saved him, but his father warned him to act like he had nothing to do with her. Sapona tried to follow, but she was stopped by some guards, leaving Mayobi with no one to stand up for her, amidst all the people she helped. In the end, she came face to face with the gallows that were to be used to execute her the following day. In front of her was the end to her story, but all she felt was peace. The sky was also peaceful, remaining blue, like she didn't lose her family and friends and she wasn't about to be dragged to a dungeon. Amidst the chaos, there was a time when she saw her late family and friends, and guessed it was her time to join them. Haluk didn't think that way. He was at his home, celebrating her capture with wine, when the head maid came in to give him proper details. She informed him about not only the capture, but also about Myobi being detained and her scheduled execution. That part of the news made him drop his cup and demand that his carriage be readied. He probably planned to get her from the prison, where she sat on her own being pestered by the wardens. They all had lewd intentions. It was better if they left their intentions as intentions nonetheless, but they acted on it, by trying to force themselves on her, because they felt she was powerless and no one was coming to save her. They also didn't believe she was a witch, like the stories read, a mistake that made them bother her to the point that her power activated. It saved her from unmentionable harm and gave her the chance to escape, yet she didn't take it. She stayed in her cell while the other wardens deliberated on how she was going to be handled the following day. During their discussion, Haluk came by, so they informed him that they were ready to take her to the execution site. They offered to bring her out, but he refused, deciding to go in and see her first. Upon hearing his request, the men panicked, looking so uneasy that he had to ask what the problem was. It was then they told him about the men who snuck into the underground prison and posed as wardens. They had an encounter with Myobi, one the wardens apologized for. They promised to be more vigilant going forward, but that didn't concern him. All he wanted to know was how Myobi was doing, so he ordered them to let him into the prison, and they did. Revealing a sight even Haluk found disturbing. 3 men, all breathing with no injuries, but they remained unresponsive. It was as though their souls were torn out of their bodies. At the end of all the chaos was Myobi, overflowing with ether. Only Haluk could see that was her power, and even she had no control over it. He felt nothing but pity for her, so he walked into the cell and covered her up, with the plan to take her home. The wardens, who had no idea what was going on, tried to stop him, reminding him that she was a prisoner, hence taking her out without proper authorization violation of the law. What he saw as a violation, however, was how their negligence let 3 weirdos sneak into the prison to take advantage of her situation. He accused them of turning a blind eye to her shame. Nevertheless, he had no quarrel with them. His business was with Myobi, whom he relieved of all her crimes by invoking House Billinier's right of immunity. The men argued that such a right was enjoyed by direct members of the bloodline, yet that didn't matter to Haluk. What mattered was that she was his wife. Hence, she could enjoy the privileges of being his wife. The men could no longer protest and submitted to his will, allowing him to not only leave with Myobi, but also to make mention of punishing the men who offended her by himself. They left together. Myobi didn't know much at the time, realizing herself when she woke up in Haluk's bed. Just like before, she hated the place and planned to leave, using her memory of the estate's layout. But Haluk didn't let her do that. He popped up from out of nowhere with a bouquet of flowers, which he tossed at her, before she could escape. Then they sat together to talk. The first thing on Haluk's mind was whether or not Myobi enjoyed her little adventure away from him. He acted as though it wasn't a big deal, but trust Myobi to act feisty. She refused to speak with him, which was fine with him. What wasn't fine, though, was her arguing that she wasn't his wife. It seemed she didn't understand the position she was in. To make it clear to her, nonetheless, he took her to the balcony to show her the guillotine sitting outside. If she didn't stay by his side, that was the only alternative she had. She was a wanted criminal after all. He got her pardon, but she had to be his wife to enjoy it, which meant she had to endure being served by maids who got her dolled up to the point she couldn't recognize herself. Aside from dealing with them, she got to enjoy luxury and meals she never dreamt of tasting. No one let her lift anything, including books, yet all the time she wondered what Haluk was gunning at by treating her so nicely. Her answer was in the bedroom when she got there to meet Haluk, going through her books. He thought her literary taste was rather dense, but all that mattered to her was him explaining what he was doing in her room. She forgot that they were married, meaning it was their room. Him saying that meant nothing to her? She didn't see them as a lovey-dovey couple, although he was determined to use a month to change her mind. Once he made that clear, he kissed her. That was the last straw for Myobi. She pushed him away and asked him why he was forcing her to spend her life with him, when he knew very well that she didn't want that. She hated how he pulled her around. Still, all he has to say was that for her to survive, she had to use him, his name, and his power, as a shield, like he did in Proserpina. He helped her realize that she had to be alive to get her revenge. It didn't matter how gory her methods were, as far as she stayed alive. She made it clear that she didn't care about him, and he agreed, admitting that he didn't mind what it took to make her stay, as far as she stayed with him. With that conviction, she gave in to his temptation, allowing him have a night with her. As soon as they finished and he left, all she could think about was resting for a bit before she planned her escape. It didn't take her long to fall asleep, only to wake up with maids surrounding her. She felt embarrassed to be seen them and would have asked them to leave if not for the outing with Haluk they told her they had to get her ready for. It took them some time, but they eventually finished up with her and allowed her to meet up with Haluk, who was waiting outside for her. I must say they did a good job with her outfit. Haluk looked like good as well. They were probably about to be the best-dressed couple in the special ball they were on their way to. It was organized to mark the tolling of the heavenly bell, a sound that echoed from a clock tower in the heart of paradise, once every 10 years. She could tell the event was very important, which made her all the more curious to know why he wanted her in attendance. His reason was that by appearing by his side for the ball, she was going to identify as the lady of House Billiner, and that was going to change the way everyone saw her. They hadn't even gotten there, and the entire building was buzzing. Gossip about Haluk and his decision to make a criminal his bride was everywhere until they stepped in, owning the room instantly. Haluk was obviously aware of what was happening, but he focused on Myobi, thanking her for coming and then taking her to her seat proudly. As expected, she got the seat right next to him, so she got pissed. She thought he was going to give her room to breathe within the 1 month he planned to use to win her heart, but he wasn't. In the meantime, he urged her to focus on looking more cheerful at the ball, to prevent onlookers from getting more gossip, but she couldn't do that. Long into the ball, Moby was losing it. She had sat for hours and found it strange that the upper class enjoyed something so boring. Just when she had given up on the event, a masked man approached her for a dance. She recognized the voice, but couldn't place her finger on where she heard it from, so she thought about turning down his offer. Haluk, nevertheless, wanted her to move a little and granted the stranger permission to dance with her on the condition that he would return her before the bell rang. He promised to do just that. Why would someone want to dance with the infamous unknown? The move made no sense at first, but when they began to dance, the stranger revealed he was Leon. Him revealing himself made her truly happy. Nonetheless, he was on borrowed time, which he used to tell her about the movement that he formed in the shadows, in her name. He assured her that her efforts were not in vain, and they hadn't forgotten her or her cause. Added to that, he did a little digging and was able to find out what was going to happen when the bell tolled. It tolled every 10 years at the same time, like clockwork. But he didn't get to tell her why on time. Haluk was watching. Even so, he wasn't the problem. The problem was the bell. As soon as it rang, although everyone thought the sound was graceful and praised it, she heard wailing. It was such a terrible sound that she collapsed, wondering why it was just her reacting to the cries. Tired of watching her suffer, Haluk came to take Myobi home. She didn't refuse. As for Leon, he whispered that he'll send word to the estate, a code she understood and acknowledged. In no time, Myobi was buildings away from the ball, glad that Leon and Sapona were safe. She was so drained that she leaned on Haluk and he expressed how worried he was about her. She claimed she was okay, yet her thoughts were fixated on what Leon was trying to tell her. Before the weird interruption, she wanted to know what happened every 10 years when the bell rang, yet she couldn't think about it peacefully. Haluk didn't let her. He assumed she was thinking about the man she danced with. He spoke with Myobi like they were acquaintances, so he wanted to know who the man was. Seeing that she wasn't willing to spill, he promised to uncover the man's identity in his own way. She couldn't let that happen and tried to distract him with a kiss. Along with the kiss came an attempt to distract him further by telling him jealousy didn't shit him. Even so, he didn't buy it. He could see what she was doing, still he played along. He looked to take things to the next level, yet she tried to stop him. He didn't budge initially and wouldn't have if they hadn't arrived at home. Timing saved Myobi, allowing her to get in and prepare for bed. Haluk, on the other hand, was handling Huss business, leaving her alone in her room. His absence was truly a benefit, because she got a message from Leon's messenger eagle and was free to check it out. At first glance, she couldn't read it, though. It was a ciphered message. It didn't take her long to translate it, but when she did, she was horrified. In the letter, Leon let her in on what he was trying to say at the ball. The 10-year tolling of the bell signified the reactivation of Paradise's energy source. With its reactivation, Proserpina was purged, meaning the lives and magic of the people of the lower land were the fuel for Paradise. They kept the land afloat by powering the core with their souls. The most recent toll meant a life-consuming disaster was about to befall the people of Proserpina. The news broke Myobi, but she didn't fall. Instead, she thought about saving what was left of her people. Haluk was one man. If she had revenge against him, Proserpina was still in danger. She needed to focus on the bigger picture, and did so by sending word back to Leon that he was to carry out the operation exactly as she would instruct. She looked to join hands with Proserpina too. A lot was in Myobi's plate. Still, she needed to juggle it all and set a new plan in motion by summoning Haluk the following day to tell him she was okay with getting married to him. As quickly as he could, Haluk got things handled and the wedding day arrived. It had been years since Paradise was graced with such a spectacle. Haluk wished they had days of such elegance more often. He was most happy on that day, especially since Myobi proposed to him, but warned that if she planned to fool him and run away the second time, he wasn't going to fall for it. She retorted that if he wasn't so sure about her, he could have refused the proposal. He ignored that comment, however, and asked if she was ready. Everyone's attention was going to be on her. Still, she didn't sweat. To her, that day marked the beginning and end of their lives. She humbly walked down the aisle with him, even though every time the bell tolled, she felt uneasy. It reminded her that plans to crush Proserpina were in motion. Even so, she has a plan too. A plan she executed after the minister read the path and asked if they were willing to be bound by it. Haluk said he was, but she dropped everyone's jaws when she refused, right before she pulled a knife on Haluk. With it, she cut his eye patch, injuring him in the process, but also revealing his golden eye. A member of the congregation asked if that meant he wasn't a true heir. To that, she answered aloud, yes. She yelled that he wasn't just a fraud, but the system that guided them was one too. She had evidence to prove it, when she is under her wedding gown, even after he asked the maids to search her thoroughly. He couldn't understand how she got past them until he saw Sapona in the corner, glaring at him. Anyway, he didn't do anything about her or Myobi. He watched as she spread proof that paradise was built off the souls of the people of Proserpina. He watched her smile when it looked like she was finally getting to the nobles. He only acted after a noble demanded they seize Myobi and detain her, to prevent the evidence from getting out. The nobles barked that as they had feared she was a problem to paradise. He was asked why he guarded them for such nonsense. That was when Haluk let Myobi know that the sins of paradise was something all the nobles knew about and approved of. They knew every truth, including his true heritage. She had made a fool out of herself. He didn't want her to continue, so he begged her to give up, like he once did. He wasn't the one with the lives of hundreds of people on his shoulders. He couldn't have understood her. But that didn't matter. The nobles wanted her head. They were so fixed on her that Haluk had to save her by blaming everything on Sapona. He hated the idea, but it was Myobi's only way out. Since she wasn't of noble blood, poor Sapona was executed on the wedding grounds, leaving Myobi in regret for dragging her to her untimely end. That's why Myobi was so bummed after the wedding. She felt like she had lost all the fight in her. Anyway, in the present, days after the wedding, she is still mourning Sapona, her situation as a glorified prisoner and the fate of her people. Nevertheless, what she sees as a sorrowful world to live in, Haluk sees as one with no distractions and wants her to focus on him, since all she valued was gone. She couldn't do that. She was too sad to even respond to him like she used to or threaten him. All she did was ignore him, to the point that he began to beg for her rudeness. He feels so touched by her mood that he hands her a knife and permits her to try to kill him. To his surprise, she turns the blade on herself, almost ending her life, if not for him grabbing the blade before it could cut her. In the process, he cuts himself, bleeding out as she expressionlessly scolds him for stopping her. She makes it clear that she resents him to the point that she hates looking at him, but that doesn't stop him from trying to give her hope with a little take from his childhood. A story of the woman in his dreams who helped him go through the hardship of his childhood. He admits that when he came across Myobi that day in the tunnels, he knew she was that woman, only younger. She gave him a reason to believe in the future then, so he feels he is supposed to return the favor now but doesn't know how to. In the end, he leaves her be, assuring her that she can call him whenever she is willing to speak. When he leaves, a sad Myobi coincidentally finds hope in the master key neatly placed in front of her. She had the layout to the estate crammed with no way out until now. The key can help her access all doors in the house and help her escape. It might give her a final shot at saving her people. No wonder she takes it and gets ready to bail. In no time, thanks to the lax security, Myobi is out of the mansion and on her way off the premise. She notices that this escape is too easy. Things lined up as though Haluk wanted her to escape, but that's still fine with her. While dashing away not too far from the mansion, she's intercepted by Leon's messenger eagle that had been circling the Ares for quite some time. It brought a letter to her from the Meldern estate, informing her that Sapona isn't dead. She was only injured at the wedding, but when she was taken for execution, Haluk let her go. In her stead, he ordered the execution of the men who snuck into Myobi's cell that night. Away from the good news, he employed her to make her way to their agreed meeting location, to further their plan, which she had a huge part to play in. On this night, she leaves the Bilgener estate with a different view of Haluk, and from a distance, she bid him farewell. Hours later, she links up with Leon, but is too focused on the mission to entertain pleasantries. She asks him about the task she gave him, and he informs her that he was successful. He got the gems she tasked him to get, along with information that it was a rare mineral only found in the mines of Proserpina. It is the same substance as the crystal that powers paradise, meaning it was what they used to extract the life force of the people of Proserpina. Leon is curious about what she intends to do with the gem and gets to know that she somehow plans to use it to shut down paradise. Maybe not it, specifically, but the main core that powers paradise. She reveals that one time in Haluk's dream, she was able to influence the core, meaning if she gets to it, she can halt its operation. There is more on her mind concerning the dream, yet she keeps it to herself. He has nothing to say about that, and silently praises her for carrying a movement against Paradise's government on her own until she got him to key into her belief. If not for her, he would have remained unconcerned like the others. Since he isn't that anymore, he takes her downstairs to show her what they've been working on. He took her to the place Paradise sealed 10 years ago, the meeting point of the holy night that her people were wasted in. They were actually in Proserpina, and he was helping transport revolutionaries to land above. It wasn't that hard for him to get support, truly. Everyone knew the lives they lived wasn't normal, but did nothing until Sapona and Leon stepped in. Sapona rallied the people of Proserpina, while he found a way to sneak them into Paradise. Nevertheless, he acknowledges that the entire movement was made possible because of her determination. Instead of take the praise, she shares it with her fallen people who paved the way for her in life and death. All they wanted was a better life for the people of the lower land. She is hell-bent on giving them that, as once everyone is evacuated from Proserpina, she wants to bring Paradise crashing down. Still, the more she thinks about what she had to do, the more she remembers the dream she had where young Haluk took her to the core and she touched it. She knows something fatal would happen when she tries it in real life, like in the dream. She knows that the core is located in the Clockwork Tower, she can stop it. But being unable to stop what comes next is why she keeps the truth to herself, even though it chokes her. Days later, the troops in Paradise are getting ready to invade Proserpina. Before then are filthy nobles who mock the people of Proserpina for trying so hard to revolt. They are sure the people are at the same Holy Night meeting point and laugh at how futile all their attempts at waging war are. Funnily, they don't laugh for long, especially after they realize that the city is too quiet to be normal. Little do they know that Myobi is taking advantage of the lack of security to freely make her way to the clock tower. Up there, she has to endure the wailing sound she hears, determined to bring down the hell-called Paradise that thrived off the souls of her people. Just when she is about to touch it and end everything, Haluk comes out from nowhere and stops her from doing what she has to do. He claims he didn't free her for this, meaning he actually let her escape. Myobi refuses to let that bother her as she proceeds with her mission, only to be stopped again by Haluk when he tells her she doesn't need to sacrifice herself to change the world. Yes, he is aware that if she touches the core, she'll die, like in his dream. That aside, he knows very well that she is afraid. He didn't want her to die unremembered. He thought it would be better if she vanished without a trace and lived. That was a proposal she found funny, because it came from the man she swore to destroy. She finds it crazy that it is he who understands her most. Nevertheless, she had to do this. Someone had to stand up against the unjust system, and she felt it had to be her. She assures him that she isn't going on with this in the name of revenge, but for life. With that, she touches the core, affecting it when he steps in and stops her with a hug, reminding her that before she rushes off to save her people, she is his. Once the words slip out, he has this look in his face and tears in his eyes, like he did back at the mansion when he clung to her and begged her not to leave without letting him know. Looking back, it all starts to make sense, as much as it doesn't make sense. He is the man she wanted to kill the most, and somehow the same person who gives her the most motivation to stay alive. Admittedly, she cannot forgive him for turning his back on her those many years ago. Nevertheless, she begs him that if he loves her a little, he should leave Paradise with her, even though where they'll end up is hell itself. His eyes lit up at the thought of them being together, free from everything going on. Before they know it, the core overloads, allowing spirits to force their way out of it. Reluctant to get Haluk into any harm, Myobi throws herself into the chaos with a smile on her face. It's ironic that her last thought is him. Foolish even. But okay. On the flip side, things are going as planned. Paradise is crashing. The nobles and the guards who marched to Proserpina are panicking. Everything is melodic, including Haluk's love for Myobi. It pushes him to jump into the core and taunt her for wanting to go before him. He urges her to hold on tightly to him, as everything crumbles and returns to its rightful state before everyone's eyes. They saw something different, though. Being in the heart of it all, death was certain for them. Even though Myobi wants to witness the world reborn, she might not get the chance. Still, she has no regrets. On the other hand, Haluk had a few. One he refuses to have is Myobi's blood on his hands. Just when everything looks grim for her, he pulls out the gem she gave to him when she was a little girl and attaches it to her, reminding her that he promised to keep her alive. She's fascinated that he had it on him all along, even more fascinated as it covers her in a floating force field, ultimately saving her, while Haluk falls to his doom. She worries about him to the last second, like he worries about her. A sad end to what started as a warm love story. Nonetheless, life goes on, and a half a year later it's still going on peacefully. A new world is being built in harmony like she dreamed. There is equality and stability. Haluk is most likely gone. He vanished in the wreck, something not many people could survive. Myobi believes he did and searches for him daily until Sapona confronts her. Since the day of the fall, her health worsened daily. Coupled with the stress of searching for him, she had to deal with the loss of ether that somehow kept her alive. With her health deteriorating to the point that she starts coughing blood, she eventually agrees to end her search for Haluk and rest. But in her dreams, she sees him and chases after him, begging him to take her with him. For the first time in her dream, he replies, telling her to meet him in the place where paradise ends, Even if it is hell, he assures her they'll face it together. It's similar to what she told him back at the bell tower. The dream highlights the gem Halak gave her, and she wakes up, confused out of breath, only to see it glowing like it's guiding her somewhere. She hopes it is guiding her to the place her soul longs for. Outside is Leon, pacing about, wondering how best he could get a smile back on her face. He rummages through a couple of ideas, eventually picking one and then going in to see if she is awake. He is stunned to see that she isn't there, but there's a letter for him and everyone she cares about. In it, she informed them that she has entrusted the world to them, believing they'll do a good job. While she cast off the shackles of revenge to go after what she truly desires, she shares her hope to meet them again someday. But that is very unlikely. She is already at the edge of the world, searching for something that she fears she might not find. Astonishingly, that thing turns out to be a person, Haluk, healthy, alive, and happy to see her. He is glad to see her, and from the way she hugs him, it's obvious she is glad to see him too. Even though she hasn't fully forgiven him, she urges him to stay by her side and pay for all his sins, a sentence he has no problem living out. They have a long way ahead, that's for sure, and he asks if she is comfortable journeying the rest of the way together, just the two of them. Mayobi doesn't care if they have to travel the rest of their lives together. She is ready.